Hollywood, California, the city where American dreams are born. Mary Ellen Samuels didn't want to live in reality. She wanted to enjoy a fantasy world where everyone adored her. This woman's dream became a nightmare for her husband. Mary Ellen was once a doomed beauty. Behind her attractive exterior, however, lurked a greedy monster. But Bob knew nothing of it and had to pay for it. In early December 1988, a small-time dealer named Jimmy Bernstein was preparing for a contract. His target was Bob Samuels. Samuels had built a successful career as a Hollywood cameraman, but then he starred in the strange story of his own downfall. The problem with Hollywood is that sometimes it's hard to distinguish fantasy from reality. Bob Samuels worked on fantasies, but lived in the real world. As a camera assistant, Bob worked behind the scenes. In recent weeks, he spent many hours on the set of the film Lethal Weapon 2. It's an irony he will never appreciate. Jimmy Bernstein is an inexperienced hitman who has never killed anyone before. He was hired for this job by Bob's wife, Mary Ellen, who wanted to get rid of her husband. Mary Ellen Samuels was a truly evil woman who exploited anyone who crossed her path, all for financial gain. Beauty is merely an outer shell beneath which a vile, malevolent soul can hide. How could a beautiful Hollywood lady become her own husband's slayer? To understand this, we must go back in time. Robert Samuels grew up in a small California town surrounded by fields and orange groves, where one could play undisturbed in the streets. Bob had dreams and talent. He loved photography, and all his friends believed that one day he would use his talent for something truly important. The boy received an apprenticeship and began working as a camera assistant on major projects. The stars loved Bob for his affable nature and hard work. Of course, Bob's work, aside from dealing with famous actors, wasn't exactly easy. Long hours behind the camera, irregular working hours, constant travel, and a crazy schedule. But Bob handled his responsibilities excellently. Professionally, things were going well for him. Only his personal life suffered because of his work. Not every woman was willing to tolerate his constant absence. Robert desperately wanted to settle down and start a family, but had given up hope of finding a suitable wife. One day, the man met the woman of his dreams. They had actually known each other since high school, when all the boys were crazy about the beautiful Mary Ellen Gurney. For Bob, she was an unattainable ideal back then. Every time he looked at her, he was lost and speechless. It was a pity that Bob didn't see anything beyond her outward beauty. Mary Ellen Gurney was the prettiest girl in the class. She shone in school plays and was the prom queen. After graduating from high school, Mary Ellen embarked on the path to fame, but didn't get far. She appeared in a few commercials, but her slender legs didn't get her into Hollywood. Instead, Mary Ellen married as a teenager, divorced, and decades after graduating from high school, returned to her hometown as a single mother with her daughter, Nicole. It was then that she met Bob Samuels. Bob, a former nerd, was now surrounded by the glamour of Hollywood, and the once unattainable prom queen fell in with him. At first, they seemed very happy, full of energy and enthusiasm. Soon, Mary Ellen starred in her own film, The Wedding, and married Bob Samuels in 1980. The young woman and child moved into her husband's house. Bob adopted Nicole and always strove to be a caring, loving, and hard-working family man. He did everything to ensure that his wife and daughter were happy and had everything they needed. And Mary Ellen finally fulfilled her long-held dream. She made the leap into Hollywood high society. She was probably hoping for a glamorous life, but in reality, they lived in a completely ordinary house in the San Fernando Valley. Every morning, Bob got up and went to work. while she had to take care of the housework, cook dinner, and everything else. Eventually, Mary Ellen got bored. Parties where she could shine were rare. Every morning, the woman woke up with difficulty, drinking and feeling unhappy. She wasn't the center of the celebrity world. She was known only as the wife of cameraman Bob. And her husband's doting gaze didn't make her life any better. What happens when your dreams of paradise are shattered? There's always a choice. Accept it or take action. Mary Ellen decided to take action. She started buying revealing clothes, attending various parties, and meeting shady characters. Bob knew his wife was cheating on him. They separated several times because of this, but Mary Ellen always found a way to win her husband back. When friends suggested to Bob that he should reconsider his marriage, he didn't listen. The man was willing to do anything to save his relationship with his lover. He wasn't one of those people who gave up at the first sign of failure. When Bob realized that Mary Ellen was bored to death while he was at work all day, he thought of something for her to do. He bought a small snack bar and made his wife the manager. He wanted to employ her to save his marriage. But selling sandwiches in the San Fernando Valley wasn't Mary Ellen's dream. It was her nightmare. It took Bob Samuels a few years to realize he had a slight problem with his perception of reality. The most beautiful woman in school, the one all the boys dreamed about, was now his wife. Bob loved Mary Ellen very much, but she was not at all the woman he had dreamed about in high school. Life had changed them dramatically. Mary Ellen had probably married Samuels for his money and his bright future. The woman's childhood hadn't been a happy one. As Bob's wife, she finally got a taste for life. For 4 years, Mary Ellen tried to play the role of a caring wife, but then she got bored. Among her friends, Samuels was the only normal man who had family values and a steady job. Most of the people Mary Ellen interacted with sold illegal substances or consumed them themselves. The sandwich shop, which was supposed to provide her with income and entertainment, didn't live up to her expectations. As soon as Bob left for filming, the diner was robbed and the entire day's takings were stolen. Samuels even bought his wife a special safe, but Mary Ellen continued to leave the money in the cash register. In fact, she was the thief herself. Through her acquaintances with shady characters, the woman became addicted to white powder, on which she spent all her money. It's important to remember that Mary Ellen had a daughter. When her mother went astray, Nicole was already a teenager. The student grew up in an environment full of lies and manipulation. From her mother, she quickly learned how to exploit and manipulate young people. Nicole Samuels was an attractive 16-year-old. She learned very early to dress provocatively and go to bars. She and Mary Ellen were like twins. Once, mother and daughter showed up at a wedding reception they were invited to, wearing identical skin-tight leather jumpsuits, looking like two Catwomen. To say it looked inappropriate would be an understatement. They simply liked being the center of attention. Mary Ellen spent most of her time in the company of Nicole's friends. They went to clubs together, drank alcohol, and smoked. It didn't seem to bother her that the girls were underage. She dressed to show as much of herself as possible: miniskirts, high heels, and revealing tops. Bob Samuels paid for all these pleasures. Actually, he wasn't so much concerned about the money. He was more concerned about Nicole, whom he had always treated like his own daughter. Bob was sad that Mary Ellen was not a good mother and had a negative influence on the girl. Finally, in 1986, Bob admitted to himself that their marriage was doomed. After 6 years of marriage and heated arguments, Mary Ellen moved into a rented apartment and took Nicole with her. Bob was devastated, and his wallet dwindled. Mary Ellen spent the money on her pleasures: clothes, jewelry, travel, white powder. This went on for a few years. Secretly, Bob hoped that one day his daughter would come to her senses and return to him. Mary Ellen knew what her ex-husband wanted, but she had no intention of becoming someone she never was for him. The winter holidays of 1988 were not the best time for Bob. He wanted to spend Christmas alone in an empty house. That year, something had changed in Samuel's mind. That fall, when Bob turned 40, he decided it was time to move on and seriously considered divorce. Although Mary Ellen and Bob had already been separated for 2 years, they were still officially married. Mary Ellen did the math and quickly realized that a divorce would be disastrous for her. Like in a Hollywood movie, becoming a widow was far more advantageous for her. The woman had long been searching for someone who would take responsibility and free her from her troublesome husband. With the divorce imminent, Mary Ellen despaired of finding someone who would help her get her husband's money. She had spoken so often and so much about how she couldn't stand her own husband that no one took her words seriously anymore. A few people were willing to help her. They discussed various ways of getting rid of him with the soon-to-be widow, from assault to staging an accident. Then they took the money and disappeared. It was immediately clear what kind of people Mary Ellen was dealing with. The woman believed that no one wanted to take care of the matter because she was no longer young and no longer as beautiful as she had been in her youth. To convince a man to commit a crime, they needed not only money but also feminine charm. Since Mary Ellen was inseparable from her daughter, she decided to use her 16-year-old Nicole to find the murderer by drawing her into this sinister conspiracy. But even that didn't work immediately. They were lucky that Mary Ellen had a particular instinct for vulnerable and weak-willed men. Hollywood is a place where everyone is on their own. If you're not a star, you're a nobody, like Jimmy Bernstein, a cunning, unscrupulous con man. Thanks to Mary Ellen, he was able to become a star in a game called Take Another's Life. James Bernstein, a tall, lumbering loner, cleverly fell into the trap and became prey. He had no friends. He earned his living selling illegal substances. Any normal mother would have kept her underage daughter away from such types. However, Mary Ellen could hardly be called a proper mother, as she had personally pressured Nicole to start an affair with Bernstein. Naturally, Jimmy was over the moon. Girls usually paid little attention to him, so he couldn't believe his luck and even proposed to Nicole, giving her a ring. For 16-year-old Nicole, however, it was just a game. At the time, she was dating 2 young men at the same time, each of whom was ready to marry her. She only changed clothes depending on who she was dating, but Jimmy didn't know that he was one of 2 potential suitors. The boy was genuinely in love and considered Nicole his fiancé. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen told her future son-in-law at every opportunity that Bob Samuels was an evil, cruel man who had sexually molested their young daughter on several occasions. She complained that her ex-husband had abused Nicole as a child and later, when she grew older, raped her. To support her words about her aggressive husband, Mary Ellen had bruises on her neck and shoulders and claimed that Bob had assaulted her during a meeting, even though she had simply had plastic surgery. Jimmy easily took the bait, and his hatred for Bob grew day by day. This was exactly what mother and daughter wanted. They fueled this feeling and wanted Bernstein himself to feel the desire to send Bob to the afterlife. This was part of their ingenious manipulation. Jimmy truly believed that the girl he loved had been abused by her evil stepfather. Now Mary Ellen had her own killer. In reality, Robert Samuels had never been a violent man. Although his wife and daughter did everything they could to defame him and convince those around him of his hypocrisy, it worked. Because finally, just before the holidays, Jimmy Bernstein felt an irresistible desire to protect his beloved. It was the perfect moment for Mary Ellen, who had learned that Bob was filing for divorce. The woman even gave Jimmy cash to keep him motivated and complete his mission. Bob Samuels only saw Mary Ellen and Nicole occasionally. He even had the feeling something bad was about to happen. At one point, the man told his family that he had had a wonderful life and had done everything he wanted. But now, Bob was determined to get a divorce and end his marriage to Mary Ellen. At the time, no one understood his strange premonitions. This only became clear later. Mary Ellen, too, was willing to see her plan through to the end. She was a good actress, playing the role of an offended woman in the dim light of San Fernando's dirty bars, and enlisting a friend to use a gun. On December 7th, 1988, Bob returned home from work and took a shower. The man was coming out of the bathroom when he was attacked. First, he was hit on the head. The blow from the rifle butt was painful, but Bob survived. He only fell to the ground and lost consciousness. Then a pillow was placed on his head and he was shot. Robert Samuels was 40 years and 2 months old when his life suddenly ended. It is unknown who fired the shot. Was it Jimmy Bernstein? Or was it a friend he hired? Or did the two of them carry out the attack together? The most important thing is that Bob Samuels was dead, and his grieving widow knew it very well. The second part of Mary Ellen's plan was this. She left Bob a series of messages on his answering machine, even though she knew full well that he was no longer alive. This was supposed to serve as proof that she had nothing to do with her husband's death. Bob's body lay in the hallway for 2 days while his ex-wife sent one message after another to his cell phone. Only then did Mary Ellen and Nicole show up at the house. Bernstein was ordered to make the attack look like a robbery gone wrong, but he failed. After the shooting, the perpetrator simply disappeared. Mother and daughter decided to take matters into their own hands. They pulled out drawers and overturned them. Mary Ellen pretended she couldn't reach her husband, and when she returned to his house, she found him dead in the hallway. The police took her story at face value and began searching for the perpetrator. However, everything was suspicious from the start. The robbery had clearly been committed by an amateur. Investigators immediately realized that it was not a burglary. Everything had been deliberately staged. When Mary Ellen put her plan into action, she had forgotten to take something valuable with her. Such details immediately catch the attention of investigators. At the police station, Mary Ellen continued to play the inconsolable widow so that the investigators would be lenient toward her and avoid asking awkward questions. The woman added a touch of flirtatiousness to her behavior, which only increased the officers' suspicions. The police officers did not fall for Mary Ellen's game. They suspected that the woman had something to do with what had happened to Bob Samuels. But to prove it, they needed evidence, which unfortunately wasn't there. Mary Ellen got away with it and continued to play the grieving widow. Everyone saw how little her husband's death really meant to her. At church, in a new form-fitting black dress with an open back that provoked disapproval from Bob's family, she acted as if it were a party rather than a time of mourning. Now that Bob was buried, Mary Ellen's life changed dramatically for the better. She inherited everything he had worked for his entire life. The widow also received a tidy sum of $250,000 from Bob's insurance and moved into his house. Instead of cleaning the carpets where the body had lain, she and Nicole simply put another carpet over them to cover the brown stains and carried on with their lives as if nothing had happened. With the most important things taken care of, Mary Ellen turned to her real task. She went to mourn her husband's death. The widow found solace in a new dress, in the dressing rooms of luxury boutiques, and wiped away her tears with lace napkins. Then Mary Ellen threw a very lavish birthday party. She rented a limousine, invited guests, and bought herself an apartment in Cancun as a gift. She was finally able to live the life she considered worthy of herself. However, not everything went so smoothly. Jimmy Bernstein, Nicole's fake fiancé, was going through a difficult time. At some point, he realized he had been used like a fool. The young man saw how exciting Mary Ellen and Nicole's life was, but he was no longer a part of that life. Perhaps it was guilt or anger at his fiancée for her betrayal that led him to consider confessing. Jimmy hinted to those around him that he had had enough, that he was going to go to the police and tell everything. It seemed as if Jimmy Bernstein would be the one to destroy Mary Ellen's perfect life. However, the widow had her own method for getting rid of unwanted partners, and Jimmy became her target. As mentioned above, Mary Ellen was easily able to see through and manipulate people. They were usually young, vulnerable men addicted to illicit substances. Paul Gall was just that type, and his financial situation left much to be desired. Therefore, he stood no chance against Mary Ellen, her money, and her cunning. She knew that Paul's brother had died because of his destructive addiction to the illicit substances that Jimmy Bernstein distributed. This meant that Jimmy was indirectly involved in Paul's brother's death, and like all dealers who distributed illicit substances, deserved to die. To be on the safe side, Mary Ellen enlisted her support. The young people also agreed to get rid of Jimmy to pay off their debts. After losing a husband, it is very difficult to adjust to life alone without a loved one. Often, they need a little reset, to get away somewhere, change their surroundings, distract themselves from their grief. And some have to go to Cancun with a bag full of money and indulge in a photo shoot with their new boyfriend. Some have to go away for comfort and peace, but Mary Ellen has to get away to establish an alibi, because she hired hitmen to kill a man she tricked into killing her husband. Incidentally, during the photo session in her hotel room, the widow decided to take a photo for fun. She stripped naked, covered her body with dollar bills, and smiled broadly. This photo would later play an important role in the widow's fate. Mary Ellen had already spent much of the money she inherited after her husband, Bob, had entered the grave 6 months earlier. At that time, Jimmy Bernstein in Los Angeles was about to follow Bob. Paul Gall and his friend Daryl Edwards were inexperienced killers, so they calmed their nerves before murdering Bernstein with a few bottles of beer. In reality, there were probably more than a few, as a drunken Paul could barely get into the car, which Mary Ellen had kindly provided. Jimmy was in the passenger seat. The friends had lied to convince him to come along, supposedly to steal illicit substances. The plan was to strangle Bernstein in the car. But unlike Bob Samuels, Bernstein had no intention of dying. He tried to escape, but unfortunately not fast enough. Paul grabbed him, punched him repeatedly in the throat, and finally strangled him with his hands. The friends threw the body into a pond, took his ID, and threw it on the street. Then, they returned home and continued celebrating. It took a month until Jimmy's body was found. When investigators went to his home to search it, they found some documents linking him to the murder of Bob Samuels. They also found a $25,000 life insurance policy that Bernstein had taken out the day after Bob's death. He had listed his fiancée Nicole as the sole beneficiary, but she left him shortly thereafter. Jimmy was another cuckolded man who couldn't distinguish his fantasies from reality. The investigator summoned Mary Ellen for questioning. The woman admitted that she had once met a young man named Jimmy Bernstein in a bar and told him about her husband. She had no idea what had driven the man to commit the crime against Bob. The widow suspected that he had simply fallen in love with her daughter and wanted to punish her evil stepfather. A breakthrough in the case came when the police began questioning Jimmy's acquaintances. Among them was Paul Gall's neighbor. She told the whole story because Paul had blurted out the whole story while drunk. When he realized that he could easily be eliminated for murdering Jimmy Bernstein, the man unhesitatingly traded Mary Ellen's freedom for his own life. The woman, who had recently committed 2 crimes with impunity, sat before the investigator and tried every trick in the book to excuse herself. But her tricks and manipulations had no effect on the officer. After informing her of the charges and reading her rights, the officers arrested Mary Ellen and put her behind bars. She never imagined such a thing could happen to her and was completely unprepared for this turn of events. In court, Mary Ellen tried to portray herself as a desperate widow who had been horribly insulted. In her opinion, the police officers were to blame for everything. They had invited her on a date, but she had turned them down, and Mary Ellen had been accused of all sorts of mortal sins to get revenge for her bruised ego. Apparently, the woman still felt like a doomed beauty who had driven high school boys crazy. However, her testimony seemed ridiculous, especially compared to the prosecution's evidence. The defense called Mary Ellen's elderly parents as witnesses. They were very sick and frail. It was very difficult to watch people of their advanced age begging the jury to spare their daughter's life. They explained that she had not had a particularly happy childhood. The parents knew nothing about the apartment in Cancun and had not heard of the new Porsche. The elderly people lived on a meager pension about a 2-hour drive from the San Fernando Valley. During her luxurious life, the daughter had visited her parents only once. The photo, in which Mary Ellen posed nude and covered only in dollar bills, became the most important evidence of her motives and spread rapidly through the media. The image clearly showed who Mary Ellen truly was. Thanks to the photo in the media, she earned the nickname Green Widow, and this image helped the woman secure a place in California's most exclusive club, Death Row. Finally, the widow could communicate with people who appreciated all her talents. Mary Ellen could have lived a good life in the real world, but she chose a different path, a life in her own fantasy world where everyone bowed down to her. Paul Gall testified against Mary Ellen in court. He had served his sentence and was released on parole. His friend Daryl Edwards was behind bars until the end of his sentence. Mary Ellen's daughter Nicole chose not to press charges. She changed her name, had children of her own, and refuses to think about her past. Bob was buried in his hometown. He was a good, hard-working boy, but he became the target of a criminal conspiracy and suffered only because he loved too much. Mary Ellen got what she had always wanted, the lead role in a great play. The ending didn't match her expectations, but not all dreams come true. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.